a playlist original.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Back to the Blockbuster with your hosts, Gaius and Jackson. Another anniversary episode. These are becoming fun to do. I think Jackson is enjoying doing them because it
Very
breaks up the
much.
whole like industry news talk, and we can just focus on one film. We just did Spring Breakers not too long ago, and that came out this week. It actually created a really fun discussion, like when I posted it on G Reels, where uh, Kurt from like Canada was like, I think it's so strange I've never seen this movie. And then Merc was like, oh, that movie's definitely right up your alley. And then someone else was like, well, I've never seen it either. And I was like, you both need to see it. And,
That's awesome. I
yeah,
love
so
being able to put people on movies that they may not necessarily have seen, and that was very much the case for me this week with our pick, Wild Things from 1998. I knew virtually nothing about this movie. I honestly don't even know that I may have like scrolled the
heard of
title
it.
before, didn't know much, and like surprised considering how stacked the cast of this movie is, but I was quite impressed and entertained with this week's watch. So consider myself feel like I'm in that category with those guys.
Yeah, it's funny too because there's certain things when we started the podcast a long time ago, like we were talking about movie anniversaries. There were some that was like, oh, I really want to do that one. That'd be fun, just because
Yeah.
like I grew up with it or whatever.
Right.
And that's happened like since we started it. So I didn't realize that like this year, and we talked about it when we Spring Breakers, that this year is huge milestone year for movies turning 5, 10, 15, 20,
Right.
30, and so on, right? And this one was one of the ones I was like, hey, if we're still doing this podcast, whenever this turns like 25, I want to talk about it.
Okay.
And it's funny because the people I talked to about it the most, they also grew up with the movie too. So they were like, oh, of course, you have to. Now it's interesting when I was like, all right, I'm going to do this one with Jackson. And they were like, well, how old is he? And I was like, I think he's like 25. I was like, so they were
Yeah.
like the exact age of the movie. So that's fun. And
It
he
is pretty
didn't grow
neat.
and he didn't grow up with it. And one friend even made a comment today, because I think it's in our Spring Breakers episode. They sent me a message. They were like, well, I mean, his friends aren't going to watch it because it came out in 98 and they're not, if it's pre 2000, no, no go.
That's right.
But Jackson's not like that though. He likes
Hell no.
movies from all decades, all eras.
That's right.
And Wild Things is one that kind of came out during a really interesting period. So it's like that same period as like, even though this isn't a horror film, it came out in that kind of teen boom after Scream and I Know You Did Last Summer, and then other
Right.
teen films started coming out like Can't Hardly Wait and this 10 Things I Hate About You. That whole like between like 96 and like 2000, it was this big kind of resurgence of these type of movies. This one was a bit different because it's certainly, at least at the time, racier than the other ones.
Very much so.
And I think that's what made it intriguing for a lot of us who were young at the time. That were like, oh, like that's the girl from like Party of Five and Scream, and what's she doing in this movie with like funky hair and a lot of eye makeup and not looking like herself. And
Definitely.
who's the other chick? Because like, I didn't even know who Denise Richards was at the time. I hadn't seen Starship Troopers. I will throw that out there before I saw this movie.
Right.
So this was my first exposure to Denise Richards. I think this is a lot of people's first exposure to her.
And what an intro it is for her.
What an intro for sure. But definitely one of those like generation movies that a lot of us that were kind of watching this stuff in the late 90s, it's like, oh, do you remember that one? That one was a lot of fun. And I think mentioned this to Owen when I talked about rewatching it, that it took me a while to really appreciate the movie from like a story standpoint, because like when you're younger, it's like this is just like an eye candy kind of movie. It's like fun in that way.
Right.
But then once I got older and would watch it multiple times and stuff, it really does have a pretty like smart script, the way it kind of weaves
Had me
in-
guessing the whole time.
yeah,
Let me tell you
weaves in
that.
all these like twists and turns, and I kind of think it is playing. I think it is poking fun a bit at some of these kind of stories in movies. Like one friend told me that it almost reminds him of like trashy like romance novel come to life. Like it's like that's what it kind of feels like. Everything is like kind of like, exaggerated in the movie.
Okay.
I think that for the most part though, like despite the fact that a lot of it is a little bit over the top, there's a lot of things in it that keep it kind of grounded. And like you said, it does keep you guessing, because I remember when I first saw it, I had no idea when it was going, and then like it kept like like I always think this is hilarious that this movie has so many twists and turns that they are still telling you the twists and turns during the credits at the end.
Yeah,
That's
I thought it was a really cool little touch that they threw that in, those little after credits kind of cookies to help piece together, show some behind the scenes stuff, give some context to the plot. You don't see that a whole lot. I thought that was a
yeah,
really great. Didn't expect that. I was almost ready to turn it off when then we start seeing a couple scenes of some stuff we don't see earlier in the movie. I was like, damn, that's pretty cool. Helped add to the story quite a bit. But yeah,
yeah,
no, it had me. This is a rare experience for me where I did not know. I mean, it's not to say I won't watch a movie without ever having seen it before, but I did not even IMDb this movie. I did never seen a trailer for it. I knew nothing regarding to like the plot. I had no spoilers, so
yeah.
I honestly just went in like completely like virgin, and it was such a payoff in that way, and I'm very glad that I did that.
Yeah, I'm glad you went in that way too, because when you told me that you went in blind, that you didn't watch the trailer, you didn't really look anything up. The only thing you really knew about was maybe like the poster, or, like cover art for it,
Yep.
like which I mean doesn't really give you an indication of what it is all about, I
Nope.
guess.
Necessarily at all.
But I mean, it is kind of cool. I was actually talking with Burke about this today. I was like, I think it was cool that you were able to really see this with no other context other than like, all right, this just turned 25. Gaius wants to do it.
Yep. Time to
let's see
throw it
what
on. Let's see what it's all about.
let's see what happens.
Exactly what my viewing experience of this movie was, and I think it benefited from it. And to anybody listening that hasn't seen it, I would advise, if you do think you're going to check it out, to go in as blind as you can, because definitely added to the viewing experience.
Right. And because there's certain things within pop culture since this movie came out that the film is kind of known for, and none of it really has to do with the plot. It's there's a lot of stuff with the girls. The threesome scene is like a big deal. It was a big deal then, and I think it was just a big deal because it's Neve Campbell, it's Denise Richards, Matt Dillon. Like it's not something you were expecting to really see, especially since you kind of forget when you're watching it that you're also dealing with two girls who are like teenagers, like they're in high school.
Right.
Kind of forget about it when you're watching it, but it's interesting because I mean, it's just, I guess it's in their performances and how they carry themselves that you kind of like do forget that until it's kind of referenced like other times in the film. We're like, oh yeah, they were in high school,
Exactly.
definitely, and doing like nefarious things so early in life.
Yeah, it not I don't know what the exact right way to word this would be. It doesn't suffer from this, but it has the similar elements of what I call euphoria syndrome, which is a newly coined word by Jackson himself. That kind of like those movies that deal with high school people that are clearly acting like they're in the adult world, where the line is very
Yeah,
much blurred, and you're like,
blurred.
this is clearly not how high school people act. So this movie has a lot of that, but still does harken back to the age of the girls, and I think it doesn't, not to the detriment of the movie at all, but it does have a
Yeah,
little bit of that in it, but which I think you have to suspend your belief a little bit to really get into the nature of what's going on between these characters, one being a student and the other two being high school age girls, or characters anyway. Actually, it
yeah.
was very early in the movie. I went on Denise Richards' IMDb page and like did the mental math to see how old she was when she was filming this. Cause
When
I
she
was like,
did this.
yeah. And so she would have been about 27, 26, depending on when her birthday was, which instantly I was like, okay, obviously I knew she wasn't a teenager, she wasn't underage, but it was a little like uncomfortable. Like the very first few minutes, they very much sexualize her character. I know
Yeah,
this is
right
supposed to be a
away.
high school girl. How old was she doing this? And so granted, she's much older than she would have been in high school, but yeah, no, just for clarification, I'm not sure
Yeah.
how old Neve Campbell would have been, though. I didn't look her up.
You know what? I'll look it up right now. So,
I think she's probably earlier 20s.
and part of the course, dude. I mean, like back then, I think it still goes on a bit now. Maybe not as much, but especially in the late 90s, like when you were getting high school movies and the actors were supposed to be playing high school, they were usually, around Denise Richards' age. I mean,
Yeah,
and a lot of it has to do with the fact that like you can't really have like minors working after a certain time. So it's like
exactly.
easier to do that. It
Yep.
is interesting though, because like, in the even in the late 90s, I was like, I mean, I don't know, no one looked like that in high school, right? Like,
Some unrealistic expectations set up for sure.
yeah. And Neve Campbell was born in 1973 on October
Okay.
3rd. So would she be like in the same
24, 25-ish,
so
roughly.
younger?
Probably filmed in 97.
Yeah,
So
so younger. Yeah, she's 2 years older than Denise Richards. So still, I mean, still interesting that, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I'm like wondering how old they actually were when they shot
yeah,
this movie.
Yeah, I was just mad curious because of just the nature of the movie, but still very like a sexy feeling movie, you know what I mean? I could definitely like I don't have the benefit of like of that experience like watching it when it came out because I mean I've seen like sexuality in movies has definitely come a long way than it
Right.
had even from the 90s. So, I've definitely seen lots more since, but I can imagine at the time like the phenomenon this movie would have been, especially amongst the other, high school or teen or young adult movies that were coming out at the
Movies.
time. Definitely racier vibe without a doubt.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up too. That's very true, I think. And then I think it's interesting too, because I think by today's standards, this is pretty tame. I think at this point,
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
there's like, I think about this movie, and a year later we got Cruel Intentions, which was like supposed to be a racy teen film as well. It
Right.
felt very racy at the time, but then you like, you can watch an episode of Gossip Girl and like get the same thing, and that was on like network TV.
Right. It's
So it's interesting. Yeah, what it felt like then compared to like now is pretty interesting.
historical context is everything.
Yeah. Just in case people don't know what the film is about, Wild Things is a 1998 American neo-noir thriller directed by John McNaughton and written by Stephen Peters. It stars Matt Dillon, Kevin Bacon, Neve Campbell, Denise Richards, Theresa Russell, Robert Wagner, and Bill Murray. I wonder if did that throw you off that he was in it?
So I did see him in the cast before I threw on the movie, but was interested to see where he would come up. His presence in that movie was amazing.
Great.
I really
Yeah.
loved him being in there. He's kind of
Yeah.
like a comedic relief. He's like a sleazy lawyer that gets Matt Dillon off in the case, I should say. And
Yeah.
yeah, he was great in that. Bill
Yeah.
Murray is always a treasure to
Well,
see,
the
but
president.
just like a cherry on top of an already deep cast.
Yeah. The film follows a high school guidance counselor in South Florida who is accused of rape by two female students and a series of subsequent revelations after a police officer begins investigating the alleged crimes. Okay, so I mean, it's interesting because that basic plot point is just like what's on the surface
Very much so.
here.
The
What did
iceberg.
you think when like it was kind of introduced? I love the early stuff when they are doing the whole like what is the sex crime thing it's like the school assembly thing,
Yeah.
and of course they have that one like kid in the audience who's like such a goof,
Cracking
like
jokes. Yeah.
not getting any like that kind of thing. Yeah.
I was giggling during his couple lines there. That was funny.
And also Denise Richards has a really, I think she knows her range and what she can do, right? She is what some people would call like a vixen. She plays up the whole like, and she's always done this in her career, right?
Great word.
But I think someone is trying to like sit down next to her in one scene or get close, and she
And,
just
like,
she's like fuck off, and,
Fuck off.
So
Literally,
yeah,
her
so
first
good.
dialogue in the movie, like someone's like, I think he's like trying to fix her blouse or like, she's like fuck off.
Fuck
So
off,
that is
yeah.
literally that was the only little snippet from that movie that I had ever seen anywhere else in media or pop culture before. I had somewhere had seen a little thumbnail of that happening. I don't remember where, but I was like, oh, that's where that's from. Where this person who I didn't even realize was Denise Richards. The only other movie I'd seen her in was Starship Troopers probably about a year ago, which, oh my God, I loved.
It's
Didn't
fun.
recognize her. I was like, no, she's from something, but didn't pinpoint it. But yeah, that little bit, it had me busting a gut when she said so. I was like, that was just out of nowhere. Like, what the hell?
The delivery was just perfect though. Like
So
she dropped
perfect.
it so, and she actually gets another fuck off like in the middle of the movie where after they like bust up the whole trial thing and she like screws up. And like Robert Wagner's character is talking to her about messing up, and she gives him one too. She's like, "Fuck off!"
In
like,
the limo or whatever.
In the limo, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. They do sexualize her pretty early in the movie, even by the way that she just sits down in her seat.
Yeah.
She doesn't sit down like a normal person would at school assembly.
That's right.
But yeah, I was kind of wondering what you thought of as it was starting, like kind of what you thought you were, since you were going in blind, like what you thought you were getting. I guess from like that point and then on to the point of the whole like car wash thing, and then what appears to look like a sexual assault later in the movie.
Yes. So I very naively went into this movie just taking everything at face value. I thought, okay, so this is what we're getting. Clearly, there's a little something going on with this guy, Matt Dillon's character, this guidance counselor, and this student of his that very much has a thing for him. And you could see like he's a kind of a player. He's a good looking younger man who's teaching at this school. Women in the community recognize his looks. So, but you can tell at least to the uninitiated who don't know anything about this movie, Matt Dillon is very much he looks like a good guy. He's coming across as a guy that, has strong willpower.
Teaching that one student how to sail, like all this,
Yeah,
they make him
exactly.
like the nicest person ever.
That's right. But you get the feeling, especially Denise Richards, she looks like a chink in his armor where you think, hey, you think this guy maybe somewhere down the line is going to have a moment of weakness. Something's going to go down between these two people, or the director wouldn't be showing these shots of them together. It wouldn't be teasing it like it is. So then you get the scene where she's very much trying to assert herself in his weekend lifestyle or his weekend plans by coming over to wash his car, and she gets all sudsy and sexy and comes into his house. And then before you see anything go on between them, you get that next shot of her coming out of the house, and she's kind of looking around. She does a good job of very much feel like the direction makes you want to think that something did happen between them.
To her. Yeah, yeah.
And she's kind of running around. She plays it off great. So you think, well, we were just showing all these things about this supposedly good character who you believe is a good guy that wouldn't stoop to this level. But her, without anybody, the important thing is that nobody's around her when she's acting this way. So you feel like she's acting genuinely. So at that point, I was like, okay, great job of not really showing whose side you're on. I did not know where it was going to go, and I very much was hooked from the start. It did not take long before I sunk my teeth into this plot. I thought it was expertly crafted in the beginning and very entertaining from the get-go.
Yeah, I also love the last name that they give Sam, which is Matt Dillon's character. The whole Mr. Lombardo thing, like my friends used to like make fun of how they said, especially when they like come to like the house to like wash the car.
Yeah,
like, hi, Mr. Lombardo, and he's like, hi, girls.
His name is mentioned a million times. She says it every single time.
She says it all the time, and then like Susie eventually, like there's a lot of it gets dropped.
I was begging for him to be like, just call me Sam. But it definitely plays into that sexual tension between the students and him, because it really, by saying his name and addressing him like an adult professional in their lives, you are constantly reminded that there is an age gap and a different dynamic between the two of them, yet there is clearly so much sexual tension between the characters as well, which I think it actually worked in the movie's favor that they address him by name so much. But there is a moment later when the script is flipped, so to speak, where my jaw was dropped and I was hooked right back into this thing. I was like, hey, I cannot wait to see where this is going. And this is after the trial, but if there's anything you want to cover before we get to that point in the plot, I'll let you take the reins, but definitely want to bookmark that part.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely. So for a lot of people that don't know, Denise Richards plays Kelly Van Ryan, and it is initially set up to make it look like she is flirting with this guidance counselor who's clearly older. I mean, older in the sense like older than her, but he's a younger employee at the high school, and there is a lot of flirting between them. And there is a thing where they go to her and her friend go to the house and to wash cars, something to do with the school, and she gets her friend to leave, which is a brilliant setup for all, like, you think that what you initially think is that she's trying to have this like sexual encounter with him, and then when it as it has that shot where like she's standing there by herself, like dripping wet, and he's like looking at her, and it just like fades to black, and when it comes back again, she's walking out the house, and I even think her shirt's like kind of ripped too. So
I didn't notice that.
Okay. So you kind of like just think that, okay, maybe something went too far, and that is they're kind of giving you. I love that they do it that way. I mean, they don't really like show their hand for like a really long time about like what actually happened, and and it should be noted that her mother, played by Theresa Russell, they obviously don't have a really great relationship.
No.
But I think the scene where she does tell her, what we learn from Kelly is that Sam Lombardo raped her, and she tells her mom this, and that scene actually plays out pretty good too. She doesn't really play it as if she's faking it. I think she's really convincing in that moment.
Yeah, very much so.
And I do love she has to be. And I do love the next cut when they cut to the mom like at the police station, and like very rich woman, listen, my daughter does not get raped in Blue Bay. like that's
right. Very ultimate Karen comes out. Claws come out. And it's great. The dynamic between the mom and Matt Dillon's character and her daughter, played by Denise Richards, is great too, because
also 32 with them, and like they have history.
Her intro is her asking. Yeah, we know that they've slept together at some point, but Matt Dillon's not feeling it anymore. her intro is her inviting him in for a drink, yet her daughter is very much trying to sleep with him as well. It's a weird sort of triangle.
Standing on the balcony and like just her like bra and underwear and some it's hilarious.
Like great. Yeah.
Yeah. And
but she was great.
She was great. I thought she was really I always laugh. Thinking that's supposed to be funny, like her Karen reaction to it is supposed to be played for laughs. Because it's just so ridiculous. Yeah. And the mix of this, we also have Susie Toller, who's played by Neve Campbell, and she's someone that's from like the opposite side of the tracks compared to like Kelly. She's not rich.
Right.
She's definitely slumming it. And in the midst of like Kelly telling her mom that Sam raped her and all this other stuff going on, Susie gets in touch with two detectives, one played by Kevin Bacon and the other played by Daphne Rubin-Vega, who plays Detective Gloria Perez. And then she also reveals that she was raped by Sam. And I, even watching it now, when I watched it again, like it's even knowing what I know that comes, it also seems pretty convincing that if this guy is like a predator or whatever, that he could easily, like, no one's going to believe you because of who you are. And I think those are really interesting dynamics that they kind of play with to kind of make you go in a totally different direction so you don't know where they're actually going.
They do a good job of painting Sam Lombardo as like a wolf in sheep's clothing. You know what I mean? Like, or at least you could believe that he could be that way. He's very convincing as an everyman who's just there for his students, who wouldn't do any of these things that he's accused of. But it's the line that they both drop to Detective Kevin Bacon's character, where they say a line, they both independently apart from each other say this line that supposedly Sam Lombardo's character says, that makes you think, okay, well, maybe he is guilty of this thing, because they both very much believable and convincing in their story, and they both drop this line that ties their stories together. But there's no indication that this may have been rehearsed or anything, so it's really like, okay, maybe this is not the guy that we thought he was in the beginning.
Yeah, and what's interesting about the line is I like that they slightly change it for who it's with. Like, in the case of Kelly, he would treat her more like a girl because she's like, you know, not trash compared to Susie, and he delivers one expletive in like allegedly to Susie that makes it different, but would be suited for her if he was trying to degrade her or do something like that. I love that they actually have that like subtle change in the line for the two girls, but it's close enough that you're like, all right, then maybe this did happen. They don't know each other really. They don't even like each other. Like they don't associate. They establish that pretty early on when they see her working on her car, and Sam is taking the girls home, and her and Denise Richards have that little exchange, and then like Neve Campbell flips her off, and they're like, they're really setting up like, okay, these girls have no business associating with each other, so there's no way that they could actually swap stories about what happened to them.
Some great writing early on in this movie.
Yeah, I agree. And then we get well, I mean, the trial stuff is great. Matt Dillon eventually has to hire Bill Murray's Kenneth Boughton to represent him, and it's funny because he plays like, oh god, what do they kind of call lawyers like him? There's like a name. I always forget what the exact word is, but like he's definitely sure. He's definitely not like you could tell that he's not necessarily like legit from the get-go. He's like kind of flying by the
flying by the seat of his pants.
Yeah, a little bit, but knows enough to like make the situation work, which is also interesting because it's hard to talk about all that with him because he's also, eventually involved in like all this stuff too.
Right.
But yeah, it's interesting how like they get together and the trial thing like falls apart. We think falls apart.
Right.
Because Susie kind of succumbs to pressure on like the witness stand while they're like cross-examining her. And that's when she admits that her and Kelly like basically made up the story that Sam raped them. And and honestly, I know you didn't grow up with this movie and like it's your first time watching it.
Yeah.
But the whole like when she says like she was mad because Sam was sleeping with her mom too, and that was it. And then Denise Richards gets up and yells, "You skanky bitch," and throws the glass. That scene has played out in so many pop culture moments.
Okay, is that right?
Everyone knows. That's one of the scenes that everyone knows from like Wild Things. It's like a signature one.
I can see why.
Because it is very much like a nighttime soap opera kind of like trashy, like,
Exactly. Very
kind of
scandalous
scene.
moment. Yes.
But yeah, looks like everything works in his favor. They negotiate like an $8.5 million settlement for defamation because these two girls lied, and they get Sandra, who's Kelly's mom, to pay that out. And what appears to look like, okay, these two girls lied on this guy. He's a good person. He's
Right.
getting what he deserves.
Yep.
But you also are aware that there's so much more movie left.
That's what I'm saying. This is all 25, 30 minutes into the movie.
So
I'm like,
early.
yeah,
It's so
this is
early.
a quick one.
Yeah. And I know you want to like you can pick up too, like what the stuff that happens like after.
That's exactly where it was headed to. So very shortly after the trial, we see Sam, who has pretty much lost everything due to these allegations. He's very much presumed guilty before, loses his house, loses everything. And so he's coming back to this, appears to be like a motel or a rundown hotel. And he's just won his settlement and he's looking forward to starting his new life. And out walks Kelly, who's been waiting in the hotel room for him. And it's like, holy
And
shit,
it looks like
this
she's
is the
gonna like
truth the whole
attack him.
time.
It looks like she's gonna attack him at first. And like they're still
Yes.
playing with you. Like, all right, she's pissed off and she's gonna get even.
Right.
And then she's like, "Did you get my mom's money?" And then like you're like, "What?"
Like,
What?
whoa, then it becomes a completely different movie. It's like, okay, now we're getting into a whole different sort of crime thriller than we thought we were gonna get. And I was like, I'm pretty sure I sat back up. I was like lounging around, like watching. I was paying attention, but then I was like, whoa, okay, here we go. This is definitely changing gears a little bit. And I was hooked all in again, which I thought was awesome little plot point. And then there are still several twists to get through, even from this moment.
One scene.
This movie is full of misdirection, and I really like that about this movie. I mean, lots of movies have tried to do this as good as this movie does and have failed, but this movie seems like a blueprint for good misdirection heavy crime thriller. Yeah, still lots going on after all this is 30 minutes into the movie. I can't believe it.
So you have Kelly, who you now know is in on it.
Yep.
And then in the movie cleverly use a little like champagne pop to let you know that someone else is in the room or enter the room. And it's now Susie, who's Neve Campbell's character, and the whole like bad girl from the opposite side of the tracks. Like she is that, but they're all working together to this money.
Yes.
And you're right, dude. I always forget. I mean, it is so early in the movie. Like, it's like you're just like, where else can they go from here?
Yeah,
like, what's going?
I'm on board though.
What's going on? And then you realize that they've been like kind of consensually all sleeping together. Like this is not like for a very very long time. And they use like that scene to like show you that they've been doing this and they're pretty comfortable with it.
Yeah, very much so.
I'm gonna throw in a little behind the scenes things. This scene is like a big deal for the movie. It was back. So when I first saw this, we convinced our friends' parents to take us, not knowing how bad it was gonna be.
Yeah.
So definitely uncomfortable during
Oh,
this.
so you've seen this with adults at the time?
With adults, yeah. Definitely uncomfortable. Is like a lot of people know the movie. If they don't know a specific plot point, they're like, oh, it's the one where like they have a threesome, like those two girls have a threesome with Matt Dillon, or it's the one where the two girls make out in the pool, or it's the other, like they know like all that stuff. But John McNaughton, who directed the movie, said that Denise Richards' first audition was good, but she had a much improved second audition, which convinced him to cast her. And her lawyers negotiated a detailed contract about how much nudity would be filmed, including the option to use a body double. But Richards did not use a body double and filmed the scene herself after drinking a pitcher of margaritas with Neve Campbell.
Okay, interesting. So I'd heard a little bit about that in my trivia deep dive after watching the movie, but didn't read that part. But hey, liquid courage goes a long way.
Yeah. Now, Neve Campbell had a strict no nudity clause. She does use a body double for some of it.
Okay.
But they said she ultimately took the role because she wanted to challenge herself and do something different. From at the time she was on Party of Five and she had just done Scream. Those Scream and Scream 2 were already out by then. So she was known for good girl roles and she wanted to kind of play something a bit different.
Yeah,
but I thought that was interesting that like they're like, all right, girl, let's get drunk so we can get through this.
The conclusion of that movie feels very much like Selena Gomez's in Spring Breakers, doesn't it? In hindsight,
it does a bit, like, because they kind of set her up not to be as bad as she eventually you see that she is. You kind of, because even in the end, you still kind of want her to win out, considering like she's had some stuff that she's gone through as well, especially
Yes.
involving like other people involved in this like plot. But it does feel like that. She does feel like the good girl actress at the time that's like, oh, I want to like
Do
subvert
something racy.
expectations and do
Yeah,
something racy.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yes.
which is interesting, I thought.
Very
But yeah,
much so.
but yeah, that scene I think goes down for a lot of people that saw it in 1998. And like I said, it's pretty tame-ish now. I mean, yes, you
Yeah.
see Denise Richards naked, and there's a lot of that, but it's not really a long scene at all. But there's parts where he's like pouring like champagne over her naked body and like all that stuff. Like I'm sure back then it was like, oh, this is a lot
for sure
for us to see.
But cinema's come a long way in terms of sexuality and nudity on screen. So I could definitely like watching it in the context of a 90s movie. I was still very much like, okay, wow, this is definitely boundary pushing for the time. But by no means, if you've, watched movies in the 2000s and 2010s, this is not something that you haven't seen before.
Yeah, agreed. So then after we know that they're all in on this together,
yes,
we have Kevin Bacon's Ray Duquette, who's like, I know that at least some of them were in it all together, and
he's now the antagonist.
he's now the bad guy, right?
Yes, because you want them to get away with it,
right? So he's also the one character, even before they reveal like all the stuff with him. There's something about him that feels very like off, like that he's not as like good as he seems.
Yeah,
you kind of learn that later, but like it kind of like got the impression like a little bit. Even watching it now, I'm like, yeah, he shows his hand a little early, especially in how he treats Susie and like all that kind of stuff before like about his involvement with everything. Like,
yes,
yeah, I was wanting to see how you kind of viewed.
Yeah, so you definitely got the benefit of the like prior watches of this movie. And just before I get deep into this point, how many times have you seen it, do you think?
Oh,
like many?
A lot.
Okay, for sure. Like plus or minus like 5.
Maybe like 10 or more.
Okay, wow, right on. So as a first time watching, I was very surprised to find out where Ray Duquette goes when we get there. But now that you're mentioning it, and I'm trying to like think back to watching it last night and what clues I got from this, but I've seen him. This isn't my most recent watch now, so I'm like gonna try and think back. But yeah, you're right. He does definitely kind of rough around with Neve Campbell's character a little bit, but I was getting the impression that he's very much invested. He doesn't want these people to get away with this crime that he's convinced has happened. Nobody else is really believing him. So I looked at his treatment of her, which is, not typical of like the good cop, as him going, he's doesn't want this to escape his grasp while he's, on these people's trail, and he's willing to, not play by the rules to catch them in the act, sort of thing. So I didn't really think that he was that was another twist down the line that I was very much blindsided by, because I did not get those vibes.
Your reaction, like,
what? Exactly.
Where did that happen?
Yeah.
So like he does seem very invested in like trying to solve the case, because he ends up trying to talk to Kelly and Susie about how they're gonna like one of them is gonna screw one of them over, and like he's trying to play them against each other. By the way, he goes to talk to Denise Richards, to Kelly. She has another iconic little moment for herself, just coming out of the pool in like her blue like one piece bikini.
See through.
They use that scene in the trailer. If you ever want to check the trailer out, they knew exactly how they were selling it.
Yeah, definitely.
But I do love her in that scene too, because she's not really quite giving anything up either. She's kind of like, well, say what you need to say. I'm done.
Exactly.
I don't want to talk to you anymore. Now it appears that he gets to Susie a bit more than Kelly, because there's also this whole situation with Davy, which is like another interesting plot point that involves Susie, and that's why Ray and Susie have some kind of prior history as far as like him maybe dealing with her family as a cop and all that stuff. And he kind of plays on that a little bit,
big time,
his discussions with her. And credit to Neve Campbell, because when you're watching it knowing what you know and how it ends, the way she plays those scenes with him, though, it seems like he is getting to her. Like he really is like she is like, all right, I can't do this anymore. Like this is unraveling. I think it's interesting when actors have to play that when they themselves know what their character's intentions are and what's going to happen down the line.
Exactly. I don't know if there's any information out there about how they film this, but if I am John McNaughton, the director filming this movie, I would kind of like release or go scene by scene with my actors so they don't know where the plot is going to get a more natural, like, granted, Neve Campbell did not need to. She puts on a great performance, even assuming knowing where her character goes.
Yeah.
But just for that added layer of insurance, I totally would have not let my actors know where their characters are going when they're filming scenes like that, because I think you just would have eliminated the risk of not being able to convince the audience that of your performance. You know what I'm saying? Maybe I'm curious. Maybe he did film it that way. I don't really know, but
Yeah, I would like to find that out. I haven't listened to. I'm gonna listen after we do this. Actually, Mark J. Parker, who was on our Scream 6 episode, he has like a podcast called The Release Date Rewind, and they covered this movie. And he's really good too at like kind of pulling, like, if there's any behind the scenes stuff he can dig up. I would love to see, like, or know how they shot some of this stuff, because the way she plays it doesn't seem like she's playing as if, like, all right, I know what's going on. Like, she seems pretty freaked out and scared by it. Even, like, I always think it's crazy when, like, he leaves the scene, and the way she leaves it, it seems like she is, like, scared,
shaken up,
yeah. And it's like one of those things where you don't have to really fake it at that point, but it's like, how much is that just you have to play with the audience by making your characters do that, I guess?
I think so. It was a little bit of that for sure. It's like that scene earlier in the movie with Denise Richards leaving Matt Dillon's house, where it's like, hey, you don't have to be putting on the act here. No one's around you, but you still are anyway. That I definitely think is misdirection for sure, but to the movie's benefit.
Yeah. And one of the things that Ray tells Susie is that, Sam has already, like, transferred money to, like, an offshore account. Like, he's going to push you guys completely out and leave you, like, high and dry. And then Susie, of course, panics, and she goes to talk to Kelly. And the scene is really, I mean, one of those, like, cheesy kind of, like, turns into, like, cat fight kind of thing for no real reason. And I do not condone using the word retarded, but when she's like, when she's going back and forth with her, she's like, are you just retarded, or are you breathing in too many fumes over there by the swamp? Like, she's just so, like, mean to her.
Definitely a 90s moment.
Yeah, of course. Like, 'cause I don't think you can, like, make that line fly
these days. No, not that context anyway.
And then then, like, of course, Kelly gets on the phone with Sam. Is like, she feels like Susie's gonna, like, ruin it, and then Susie's like, oh, now you guys are gonna fuck me over, and it starts a little, like, pretty good slap fight.
Yeah.
That leads to some wrestling in the pool, and then leads to just making out between these two characters. But I thought was interesting, though, beyond it being what is supposed to be like a sexy scene, it creates an interesting dynamic between them and how long they've actually been involved. Like, I don't really know how, if it gives you the impression in the entire movie, like, how long they've actually been involved together. It's to the point where they could actually turn, like, a hard moment where they're fighting into a tender moment where she's like, oh, you are scared, aren't you? And then it turns into what it turns into.
I was kind of under the impression that it was their first time as characters doing it. I know too since that it was their first time as actors, or at least Neve Campbell's first time kissing another girl. Which would have been no doubt a very interesting scene to film for the first time in front of a bunch of people on camera. They play a great job of it, and yeah, you're right, definitely another interesting dynamic for characters that whose dynamics are changing with each scene, it seems.
Yeah. Also, completely funny is Kevin Bacon's reaction to, like, because he's filming, because he's trying to, like, he's filming it, and he's just like, what the hell's going on?
I'm now filming a porno from behind a tree of these high school girls.
His face is, like, so great in that. Like, that's another moment, like, I didn't see that coming.
I straight up giggled when the camera shows his face. I was like, oh my God. Wasn't expecting that one.
Yeah, not at all. And then a few nights later at the beach, they lure Susie to the beach because, they already have had to talk about how they need to get rid of her. And, it appears that, like, they get her drunk, and then Sam bludgeons her with, like, champagne bottle.
And they wrap her up.
And they wrap her up. You see blood and teeth fly, so you assume that she's dead. And they, like you said, they wrap up her body and dispose of it, and that's what it looks like. And then that leads them to Ray and his partner investigating, like, her disappearance. What did you think of his partner, like the character that she played, and, like, kind of like what? Because I feel like she's almost like the audience, like, picking up on these things as we are.
She felt like, exactly. The words right out of my mouth. She felt like me when I'm watching this movie. She's very much at the mercy of whatever people are telling her, and everybody pretty much that she is around in this movie is lying to her in some way, shape, or form. So she very much is a reflection of the audience, I felt. Just pretty much taking everybody's word for what's going on. and is really having the wool pull over her eyes, even by some people that she's the closest to character-wise in this movie.
Yeah.
Thought like I could definitely see some parts where you feel like there might end up being something between her and Matt Dillon's character, kind of like
Yeah.
Saved by the Bell sort of moment.
Yeah.
But I could definitely, I knew that she was kind of easy pickings for having the wool pulled over her eyes by a character. She was very naive, played
Yeah.
excellently by the actress that plays her.
And the only one I think that's like kind of on the up and up. I mean,
Yeah,
I guess like
that's right.
The only one that's like that's not like trying to like scheme or do something.
She's just doing her job.
Just
and
doing her
else
job.
around her is a scheming, backstabbing bad guy.
Yep. And they tried to get Ray to drop the case, and they're like, "You're too involved in this. It's not working out anymore." And I have mentioned that whole scene with the other detective and like Sam, where he kind of shows her like, Kelly was already a troubled girl. This is why, she might have lied about this, like that kind of all that stuff. All these files from her on school and said that she was always troubled and violent. And then, you think Ray is kind of off the case already, but he goes to the Van Ryan's house to confront Kelly, and it ends where you just hear like a gunshot heard, and then by the time you get right, Denise Richards is out of the picture too. Like,
yes, so sad.
The two main, I know, right? Like, and not just not just for the eye candy. I mean, it is there, but she is a really fun character.
She's a great fun character. I really enjoyed her presence throughout the movie, and when that happened, I still didn't know if I was convinced that she was out because of just how everything plays out. But once you realize like that's the end, it's like, damn, yeah, I'm gonna miss her in this movie. She was great.
All right, so I do want. Oh yeah, no. What do you want to say?
I was gonna say it's very telling how you don't actually see the action play out on camera. You're like,
so at this point, where you're like, all right, you've already fooled me once, guys.
Yeah, it's like fool me once, shame on me. Shame on you, fool me twice. Shame on me. I was kind of picking up on certain things, but still did not know where things were going. But
I was kind of wondering where you thought things would be going after this, because you're like, all right, she's gone, Susie's gone. Right. Ray says that Kelly fired first, which is why he was forced to kill her in self-defense. They don't file any charges against him, but he is dismissed from the force for disobeying.
Right.
About dropping the case. So, like, where did you think things were going to go after that? Where you're just like, oh, well, maybe Sam just runs off with like all the money and
I was expecting at this point in the movie, again, still playing into the naive first-time viewer. I'm like, this is clearly heading towards a showdown between Kevin Bacon and Matt Dillon, where one's hot on his trail. All Matt Dillon has to do is leave and get out of the jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Seems like he's home free, but Kevin Bacon is, slowly, as we know, his character is going to Kelly Van Ryan's place to protect her, to expose her to Sam Lombardo's scheming. So at that point, like, although she dies under suspicious circumstances and it's clearly him that kills her, I still didn't know necessarily if I thought that he was a bad guy. I wasn't sure what was going on with him, but I thought, okay, he's very much not going to stop with this case, even though he's not on the force or he's suspended. He's still pursuing this case on his own time. So it naturally just seemed like it was going to lead towards a showdown with him and Matt Dillon. So that's kind of where I thought it was headed.
And then it wasn't.
And the wolves pull your eyes again.
Twist number 120. Ray is like working with Sam, and you find that I like how you find that out with a pointless, just full frontal scene of Kevin Bacon standing in the shower.
I was surprised to see. That was the earliest example of full frontal male nudity that I can think of in film. Like, I've never seen an example of that one earlier than like the 2010s that I can think of. Anyway, I was surprised to see some Kevin junk in there. I was like,
now I know exactly what clip I'm going to use. I was surprised to see Kevin junk.
God. Have fun with that.
Kevin Bacon also had a no nudity clause in his contract. But they said, but without giving much thought, allowed McNaughton to use the shot that he thought looked best, and a moment of frontal nudity was included in the film. He was surprised by how many questions he got about it at the American press showing, and noted that the European press did not ask him about it at all. It was just all the American.
Probably natural,
like whatever. But I love that. That's funny that he was like, "Well, just use whatever the best shot is." I guess he's like, the best shot is just all your Kevin Bacon junk.
So like, I guess they filmed that scene of Matt Dillon throwing him the towel multiple times, and it was only like one or two where Matt Dillon didn't like block him out of that scene. Like his like nether regions.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that just happens to be the shot that John McNaughton puts in the movie. And what's funny too that I was reading is that so Kevin Bacon, this is his first producing credit that he had, and he's an
yeah.
executive producer in the movie. So if he could have sued himself for the inclusion of his own movie in the movie, which I just thought is hilarious.
That is hilarious. And I'm bringing up this moment because I think this is maybe when this would have been revealed if they kept it. But it says the original screenplay featured a gay scene between Duquette and Sam Lombardo near the end of the film, in which the men kiss in the shower. Yeah, revealing that similarly to Susie and Kelly, the two had a homosexual relationship that allowed Lombardo to prey on Duquette in order to manipulate him and ultimately con him out of money. They said Kevin Bacon that the scene was modified to eliminate any suggestion of a sexual relationship between the two men, as the film's financiers didn't like the idea of men making out. They felt it went too far.
Interesting.
But there's a really interesting dichotomy though. They were trying to set up the fact that like, you know, the same thing that was going on with Susie and Kelly, that was also going on with like Sam and Ray.
Yeah, definitely. Interesting choice there because they were clearly okay with it happening between the female characters, but maybe, I mean, maybe it wasn't as not accepted, but like as present in 90s media at that time. I can see
Yeah.
why maybe they thought it would have, gone over the edge, but definitely I don't think in the years that have followed would have been much of an issue at all. I don't think anymore, but
Yeah.
yeah, a little way that the movie shows it's a product of its time in a certain way. But I
Yeah.
did read that they had a shower scene together. I didn't necessarily realize that it alluded to them being homosexuals, but I thought that was an interesting bit that they cut that out too.
Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting because I'm thinking about it. Like, would it have added, like, knowing that they had a relationship, would that have added anything to the plot? I mean, I don't think it necessarily does. It probably would have been an interesting, like, oh, like kind of dichotomy between like all these
Right.
characters. But
The movie suffers without that, though.
yeah, I don't think you lose anything from it.
No.
And then Ray is also very. Sam is displeased that Ray killed Kelly because they were gonna just like frame her for Susie's murder, and that kind of made things a bit more like difficult.
Harry, yeah.
So now I gotta ask you again. Now that you know that like they're in cahoots, they're working together, and now they're going sailing on Sam's boat, where do you think it's going then?
At that point, I was done making predictions. I was like just along for the ride. I didn't necessarily think and have any illusions that they were going to both make it out. I didn't know who was going to come out on top of this movie, and I still wouldn't have guessed that who does come out on top. I would have figured it'd be one of them two. But at this point, I was not making predictions anymore. Clearly, I had fallen prey to all the misdirection in this movie multiple times.
Yeah.
I was just watching it for the sake of watching. At this point, like, hey, what are you going to throw at us next?
Yeah.
But in a way, it does sort of come back to this showdown between them, just not under the same context.
The way you think, well, yeah.
Exactly. Not the way they thought it had or would have earlier in the movie.
Yeah. So, like, I think you get the impression, I think even watching it early on, like, I got the impression that, like, one of them is going to try to take one of them out because I don't think at this point you've learned that none of these characters really want to share anything with each other.
No honor amongst thieves, right?
They want all the money, all the glory to themselves. So I kind of knew that was coming because they do get into a fight and Sam attempts to kill Ray, and then Ray fights back, and then he's suddenly like shot with a spear gun. And none other than the presumably dead Susie, who is now sporting blonde hair, still Neve Campbell, still very much alive, did not get bludgeoned in the swamp as we thought she did. And, you know, this ends up being like pretty good, especially when you know about the circumstances of the whole Davy character and like her interactions with Ray. It's kind of like this full circle kind of comeback.
Full circle moment.
For her to get rid of him. So, he's gone. No more Kevin Bacon. I honestly thought that is where it would have. I thought they were just gonna have. I first saw it, just Sam and Susie be together, but then I kind of forgot. All right, maybe again, none of these characters like sharing anything with each other. So kind of one misdirection too with Neve Campbell's character with Susie is that they make it seem like she's not smart, like, and she is very smart. And you learn that towards the end of the movie too, where the other detective is talking to. I always forget who the lady was, like in relation to her, but that living with Susie, and basically said that, you know, this girl was like highly intelligent and
like a 200 IQ. I think they dropped. Like, okay, clearly she's got she's been hiding in plain sight with how intelligent she really is, which I would have liked a cue, I guess, earlier in the movie. Maybe it would have
Yeah, she was
jeopardized where it's
smarter.
going. But I think that would have like gone a long way for her character. But
It's like you get the impression that like Sam's trying to get rid of her by like telling her to like work with the winch like on the boat, like she won't know what she's doing. Like maybe he can like easily get rid of her, and
right,
and then he accepts a drink from her like in the midst of this,
what's
and
your poison?
you're like, what's your poison? Yeah, and you really are thinking that like it's gonna go the way that where he's gonna get rid of her, and like
Yep.
nope, she's poisoned his drink, and not only has she poisoned his drink, she knows exactly how to use all those things on the boat.
Yeah.
Because it's not enough that she poisons him, and she also like completely like releases the thing and it smacks
Yeah,
in the
the
face. And
boom knocks him over
boom,
the.
boom,
Yeah, that's right. And then he's
yeah,
floating out there with Ray.
yeah. And then like I think the movie's like completely over.
Right.
Uh, detective. I want to get that lady's name because they're. Let me see if I can find it because she's the one that explains the stuff about Susie and Davy and like how like Ray and Susie had interactions like before. She's the one that tells that story to Gloria, and I think that's when Gloria fully realizes that Ray also wasn't on the up and up for like a really long time, and that she was kind of like snowed by him a bit like the entire time they've probably been working together. But this is my favorite thing about the movie. I know I kind of mentioned it about how like there's so many twists and turns in it that
Yep.
they're still telling you what the twists and turns are during the mid credits. I think that was such a brilliant move to just be like, all right, all these things in the story that you probably thought didn't make sense, like how did that happen? They
Right.
fully explain it. Like they go all the way back to how like Susie was the mastermind behind all that. Like she found out that like Kelly and him were having sex. There's pictures. Neve Campbell plays that scene so very well. She just like drops him on the table and just sits there, like, so what do you want to do about that? Like, they're just gonna make
Right.
stuff at him. and then what's cool about those mid credit scenes too is that you're watching who you thought was someone that they were taking advantage of, and she's been in control the entire time. Like she's kind of been bossing Sam around. Like when she tells him like she needs to like interact with Ray at the bar, and she's like, you guys are gonna get along great. You're basically like the same person, that kind of thing. Like
Yep.
it's so great how they reveal everything about her and like
Absolutely.
and just like a minute or two worth of like scenes. And we even see how like they kind of faked the bludgeoning a bit.
A little bit. Yeah. With the whole teeth
I don't
pulling scene.
I don't think
Oh.
that totally all works. If you like really overthink like how if you overthink it too much, I think you're like that doesn't completely jive. But
I wasn't, yeah, exactly sold. Like the fact too that they show her wrapped up in like the I don't know what you call it, like the clear sort of like wrap in the back of the trunk, and she's like laying there, like presumably dead. I'm like, okay, that is a length you don't have to go to when she's clearly alive. But again, its job in directing the audience, so I can appreciate it
and
for
by
that.
the way, the close up showing them trying to yank her teeth out, and she's like, or him trying to do it, and she's like, oh, you're just a pussy, and she does it like herself. Yeah, like, and then they cut to black on the crutch of it, like ripping out of her mouth.
Oh, hard to watch.
And then we get one final, I guess, twist. Everyone is all dead except for Susie, and our good boy Bill Murray, lawyer, shows up and gives her a briefcase full of cash, and she ends up with all the money, and he gets his cut, which is like
was the
which he
offshore
mentions
account, right?
account, yeah, and he makes sure he gets his cut. I love his line because Bill Murray's really good at his line deliveries. As she's walking away, and he just says, "Be good," like, and yeah, that's our final twist of Wild Things. By the time it was all over, was it just like whiplash?
Yeah, I was like exhausted, but in the best sort of way. I was like, wow, what a mind fuck of a movie. Like, definitely one that I have some buddies in particular that will eat this sort of movie up with all the twists and turns and keep you guessing. So, definitely one that I'm going to be recommending to a certain amount of my movie loving buddies in the future. Like, definitely, it was enough. I was thoroughly entertained throughout it. I definitely think highly of this movie. Was glad I got to watch it the way I did, and we'll be returning to it in the future. Most certainly, I'm hoping that there's a. I think this will definitely it'll be so interesting to watch this movie on second and
once you know everything,
fewer viewings, just knowing what I know now, and it'll be cool to pick up on different little clues throughout. I'm excited to do that.
Yeah, and there's just a few technical things I wanted. Like, this movie cost $20 million to make. It's shot very well. It's a really good looking movie for 1998. really feel like the kind of Florida Everglades like when you're watching it. I
And
also
they,
love
yeah,
I also love the score. George S. Clinton did the music. There's like some really subtle things that sound like feel like you're in the environment that they're in, and there's also little subtle things he does with the score. It's a really like this like humming kind of thing, especially when Kelly is first confronting, not confronting, but when she's standing in front of Sam after the car wash stuff, she's standing there wet. And there's
mm,
just like this brief moment of music that's just like soft and just works for the scene. There's like little things like that where you don't really expect a movie like this to really show off technical aspects like that.
yeah, it's all the better for it though. And the music composition makes a film, and this definitely added to the experience of Wild Things. Absolutely. I didn't look up who the composer was, but as I've mentioned before, it's an aspect of movie making I really, really cherish. And
Yeah.
you're right, it just really fit the atmosphere of this movie to a T.
Yeah, I agree. And then the movie, of course, was released on March 20th, 1998. It says grossed $30.1 million in the United States and $37.1 million internationally for a worldwide total of $67.2 million on a $20 million budget. Pretty good at the time. I think more so than then when it was in theaters, it's became a bigger thing once it came out on like home viewing and people started watching it. Maybe people that weren't like interested in it when it was playing theatrically discovered it later, and I think it's kind of grown in that sense.
Right.
Uh, Very similar in the way to like Spring Breakers, where I think like that movie too benefits
Definitely.
from like being separated from it by a few years.
The resurgence after the theatrical run on home media for sure. And that back then was even bigger in terms of like the movie's financial success too, right? Way more so than it is now.
Yeah, I agree. 67% fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Since it says Wild Things is a delightfully salacious, flesh exposed romp that also requires a high degree of love for trash cinema. I guess that's a compliment.
It doesn't sound like it, but it very much is.
Now, what's interesting is that this got a C plus cinema score from opening day audiences. That's kind of low, but I don't know if it's because they maybe were expecting something else and this is what they got. I would be pretty happy with, this being what I got.
100%. But yeah, and I'm sure maybe at the time, do you remember like in the theater, like thinking fondly of the movie, like you were happy
I,
with what you got?
I was happy with what I got. I think watching it like subsequent viewings too, I think the way they promoted it, it's hard to promote it properly without giving everything away.
Very much so.
So on the surface, I think most of the trailers just give you the indication that like that one like a plot. So the Sam Lombardo, the rape, and like maybe these that kind of stuff, and it doesn't really
That's
allude to like anything else.
that's all I would have promoted it as well. Honestly, I think that was the smart decision because once you
Yeah,
go into the other territory, you definitely jeopardize the fun that this movie really has.
I
But
agree.
I can see why that would maybe like I don't know people. It's funny because people sometimes they react poorly to not having their expectations subverged, and
Yeah,
they don't get exactly what they think they're going to get. I always welcome that for the most part,
I
obviously
too.
within reason, but it's nice to sometimes get something that you weren't exactly expecting, or when it deviates a little bit. I don't understand the criticism there. Certainly, that is the case for some people, though. But I thought that
Yeah,
was great.
yeah. Great Roger Ebert too. I guess passed away 10 years ago today. I didn't realize
Oh
that. I
man, I didn't know that.
saw it on Twitter. He liked Wild Things,
I
which is
watched his
kind of
video with him and
Siskel.
Siskel.
Yeah, he
Yeah,
praised McNaughton's directing and plot twist. He described it again as lurid trash,
yeah.
with the plot so twisted they're still explaining it during the closing titles. It's like a three-way collision between a softcore sex film, a soap opera, and a B-grade noir. I liked it.
Yeah.
That's so
I
great.
was just before recording, I watched a little like 4 minute video of him and Gene Siskel talking about their experience with the movie on, I'm assuming what was opening weekend back in the day.
Yeah,
And Siskel liked it too, not nearly as much as
not
he,
as much. Yeah,
but it was cool. Roger Ebert's takes on movies I always fascinate me. I never know what he's gonna like or what he's gonna criticize. So like the fact that he like was all on board with Wild Things, it's like, man, good for you. Like that's awesome that he
yeah. It's sometimes
fairly
because
judged it.
he gets like kind of like he goes one way or like okay he's not gonna like this
He's
type of movie because he didn't
unpredictable,
like
very
this.
much
Yeah,
so, especially with his violence and like nudity and stuff, which this movie has lots of both.
yep. Uh, and then just some of the other reviews. The New York Times praised Campbell and Richards' performances and also McNaughton's direction for adding a decadent gloss to this far-fetched quintuple crossing tale, although she criticized the plot as being loony.
Mm,
And then The Washington Post said the movie is clearly a crock, and although it may not have a single redeeming feature, but it doesn't have a dull moment either.
That's right.
And the same person in that same newspaper said described the film as being as tawdry as someone else's lingerie, yet not without a certain prudent watchability. I feel like everyone just felt bad about liking it. Enjoying
Yeah, I sure as hell didn't. I loved every minute of it, and I had to say it. It was exactly, well, I can't say it's exactly what I wanted because I didn't know what to expect from this movie, but I was very happy with what I got,
Yeah,
and
I
would
agree
recommend it very much so to watch
wholeheartedly.
it. Yeah.
And I think what Variety says about it kind of sums it up best with everyone involved and why maybe certain people wanted to be in the movie. They said that they praised the casting of everyone involved and said you have an ensemble that appears to be enjoying the challenge of offbeat roles and unusual material. There's not a wrong note struck by the game group of players, and they also praised the film as original with a glossy, unreal quality that nicely dovetails with the pulse of the drama. I think that's a good way to describe that, actually. Like, I think they are having a lot of fun, like kind of
Mm,
playing around a little bit and not doing what was totally expected.
very much
Makes
so.
sense.
Yeah.
This film was also nominated for Best Kiss at the MTV Movie Awards. It did not win. I don't know how it didn't win. Somehow,
But for which one? Which kiss?
pull one.
Yeah,
See
between Ned
how
and Denise.
they made up for it a year later because they gave Best Kiss to Sarah Michelle Gellar and Selma Blair for their kiss in Cruel Intention. So there's that.
Okay, awesome.
And then, as far as its legacy today, in a retrospective of the film celebrating its 20th anniversary, Entertainment Weekly writer Krish Swati noted that while things marked a peak in lurid sex-themed thriller films in the late 1990s, summarizing, as a rule, movies like Wild Things fight an uphill battle with critics would want to seem above titillation, but this was one of those rare films whose underlying smarts could not be denied.
Yeah,
And,
accurate.
and then the director said that 2018 he said Wild Things is his most political film due to his focus on social class, concluding who wins, the girl from the
Okay.
trailer park. The girl from the trailer park, she's all gone on the 90-foot sailboat out in the Caribbean. Pretty much everyone else is dead. That was the 90s, the concentration of wealth, but the girl from the trailer park takes them all down. I'm from the striving working class. A lot of the kids I grew up with, the parents didn't care if their kid dropped out of school, but some of us had parents who insisted their children have an education, go to college, escape all that. So that's where my heart always lies with the film. It's interesting to
Okay.
see how people think about certain things deeper than maybe you would have, like
Yeah, 100%.
about a certain movie.
I definitely see what he's talking about, the whole social commentary and class commentary, without a doubt. But at the time, like watching the movie, it wasn't that prevalent. But I see why he would have regarded it that way, and I can see that now in hindsight. But at the
Yeah,
time, I was just worried about who was going to betray who next and who was going to make it out alive.
at this point.
Yeah.
And as far as the life for Wild Things, it was three sequels released direct to video.
God,
Wild Things 2 in 2004. No one from the first one is, of
I
course, in
can't
it.
imagine.
Wild Things Diamonds in the Rough came out in 2005, and Wild Things Foursome came out in 2010. They say
Okay, as far as
they,
2010.
they said the sequels recycled much of the plot, dialogue, and direction of the first film, albeit with different actors. All three films take place in Blue Bay, as well as the high school the original film took place in.
Interesting.
And then in 2006, the producers tried to develop a spiritual successor and John McNaughton was in talks again to direct a script by Steven Peters titled Backstabbers, and they wanted Richards and Campbell to hear their war talks, but then it kind of fell apart.
Okay, that would have been interesting in another life, but I feel like this is a great standalone. Didn't need
I
to
think
be
it
touched
is.
again. I think this would be a great remake, maybe someday. Even if I never find myself saying that, but I think
It'd be interesting to see
modern
this.
update would be pretty
Yeah,
cool. Tweak it a little bit. This is just a great story.
yeah, I agree. And one last little fun fact for you, because I can't, I want to imagine him playing in this part. Robert Downey Jr. was the first choice for the role of Sam Lombardo.
Right.
That openly went to Matt Dillon. Downey was considered because of his highly publicized drug problems, and although he was in recovery, he was seen as too great an insurance risk. Producer Rodney Ebert said we couldn't make it work, and the production company even offered to put up some of the money, but there was just too many lawyers and insurance people and bond company people involved, so that's why it didn't happen. But I can't.
Understandable.
I'm trying to think about him in 1998, and I don't know if I can see him playing. I think Matt Dillon looks the part. Like Matt Dillon actually reminds me of like what high school I went to, there were actually guys that looked like him that were like teachers, guidance
Oh
counselors.
yeah,
So like he actually looks like the part of like young like teacher or
I think he
authority
plays it
figure.
great. I wouldn't want anybody else in the role. I think Robert Downey Jr. would be an interesting casting decision, though, for sure. I see him in it too, but Matt Dillon to me is perfectly casted.
I agree. So you throw the score thing at me, so I'm going to throw it at you because it's your first time watching it. If you're were to give it a score, what would you give it? Whatever your meter is, like out of
Yeah,
10 or
I
four
usually
stars,
do out of
whatever.
10. So I'm gonna just differentiate between like number I'm gonna give it. I don't necessarily feel like it's like crafted this way, but my in terms of my enjoyment of this movie, I'm gonna give it like a nice solid 8.
Two.
Like really like oh awesome. Sweet. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it an aid movie? Maybe not, but it takes up entertainment value, rewatchability, no doubt, an awesome ensemble cast. Like there's just a lot going for it.
Yeah, I think with that score and like the score I'm giving it to the 8
Yep.
is that there are certain movies that are made for certain purposes. Certain everything doesn't
Yes.
have to be Goodfellas or Citizen Kane or The
Ex-
Godfather. Like
exactly. And you got to
the
differentiate between that. It
yeah,
knows what it's trying to do.
the movie that they intended to make, I think this is exactly what they wanted to make.
Very much
And
so.
and I think there's a reason, we weren't the only ones that did 25-year episode on this movie. Like
Okay, right on.
there are a few other stuff on Twitter and Instagram that I saw where people were, shouting it out and did stuff on their shows. That's just the power of like a movie like this though. I mean, if you grow up with it, you see it at a certain time,
Yep.
like it kind of informs like you were watching at that time, who was famous at that time, why this was
Yeah,
such a big deal for them to maybe do the things in that movie that they were doing at the time. Uh,
totally.
so, I went to film school. I sadly went to film school with a lot of film snobs, and I think some of them would turn their nose up at this movie.
Right.
Um,
Well,
but
shame on them.
no
'Cause
reason to
Wild
do
Things is
so
dope.
because it's a lot of fun and
Yeah.
keeps you guessing to the very end. And like I said, it will be interesting to see when you watch it again, like knowing how your reaction to scenes will be different, knowing what
Yeah.
in the movie.
This will
Um,
definitely be one I'd probably try and show Cam sometime in the future when I want to get a rewatch this one in because I know this would be up his alley too. So I'm very much excited for that rewatch, and I will no doubt let you know how it holds up upon second watch. But I can see this being a movie that I carry with me into the future, trying to put some more people on because it was. I mean, there's nothing I could say that hasn't been said about it. It was just so delightfully entertaining and positively trashy that yeah, it's such a
like
charisma
I'm,
personality to
like I'm
it.
agreeing with all the mainstream reviews that were just like just accept it for
100%.
just being like
Yeah.
eyegloss trash.
Yeah,
That's fine. That's
exactly.
completely fine.
And I'm glad to see that it's after all these years, it's still getting some love and appreciation in the film
Yep.
community because it deserves it more
Exactly.
so
So
than some others.
if you are a fan, before we go, there is a 4K edition of this movie.
That's pretty
It's
sweet.
and like I was saying, how the movie looks very, 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 very good. It's shot very well. This is probably the best the movie has ever looked. And there's a lot of bonus material in it. There's a couple of commentaries. There's like a collector's book in here about the making of the
Shit.
movie. It's a little pricey. It's
No
like
doubt.
a little pricey, but if you're a fan of the movie, I think that you would really enjoy owning it because I only had it on DVD for a very long time, and
Right.
it was very much DVD quality. So yeah, this is a good copy to pick up if you are a fan of Wild Things.
Yes, this will definitely be one I'm hoping to add to my collection. Maybe I have come across this. I don't ever recall seeing like a physical copy of this movie before. I'm sure I have and just didn't know what I was looking at, but definitely one to be keeping my eyes open for in the future when I am looking to spruce up my collection. I will definitely include Wild Things in there if I ever walk past it again. Or I guess I could order it too. Like I'm
Yeah,
kind of talking like a
Amazon.
dinosaur here, but yeah, exactly. There you go.
I know. The young guy on
Yeah,
here, and you're like,
that's
what's
right. Yeah, I know. I never consider doing that. I'm always like out looking at my movie places to see what's there. That's just something so
It's
timeless about
all
going.
going away, man.
I
Like
know,
it's
man. It
like
really is. Don't
slowly
even. I don't want to talk
dwindling.
about
I know.
it.
Well, thank you again for joining on another anniversary episode. This is, I think, our third one so far. It
Is
was,
that it? Eh?
I think, In Bruges, Spring
Spring
Breakers, and
Breakers.
this.
Yeah,
If
sounds about right.
yeah. So
Thought
the
maybe we
last two,
had.
I wonder if there was another one. It felt like there was one in between, but
I thought so, but
I can't think of what it is.
it's there for us to look at. I'm sure we'll
Yeah.
answer this,
Well,
but
the last two have been because of me. there's a big list, and like I want Jackson to pull one that he's like, I want to do that one.
I'm
Because
gonna have a look after we do this, and we'll
I feel
settle
bad that
down.
they've all been mine.
No, man, nothing. I've had such a blast covering all these ones, and In Bruges was one that I was very familiar with too, and I very much loved and was happy to cover. But yeah,
Yeah.
I'm gonna go see if I can't narrow one down that we can chat about here soon, maybe for the month of April. That's having a anniversary because
There's actually some good ones in April too. That should be fun.
Yeah, I love doing these types of episodes. It's very much fun to just cover one movie and talk about its impact all these years later. It's always great to discuss, give the attention to one movie that we think is worth the watch. So yeah,
Yep.
I was happy to join you on this one. And next time I'll have something for us to break down my suggestion, and I'm very much looking forward to that.
Yep,
So,
sure.
yeah.
All right. Well, I mean,
Right
this
on.
is a little
Well,
different,
yes.
little different show, but you gotta send this off as always in a great
100%,
way that
guys.
you do.
Thank you, my friend. Yeah, thank you guys for joining us on our anniversary episode of Wild Things. If you haven't checked it out before, definitely comes highly recommended from both of us. Wherever you guys can find it, definitely check it out wherever you guys get your chance. Thanks again for joining us on Back to the Blockbuster. As you do, stay tuned next week for our regular scheduled episode, and we have a deep dive coming up for you guys as well. You guys know where to find us, wherever you guys get your podcasts, wherever you guys have social media, you can find Back to the Blockbuster there. Thanks again, Gaius, for breaking down movies with me, man, and for having me on. It's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure too, my friend.